There it goes. All right, Patriots Lament episode 464. This week we are going to be jumping into some of the opportunities that are going to be coming out of the so-called second wave. There's a lot to discuss there. I think all three of us have spent the last week or two figuring out what we're going to do in the next few months, like putting our plan together. We had an episode a few weeks ago talking about how nobody has a plan, including the people who are supposedly running things or in charge. But we have been putting that together. We've been digging into some information about what other folks are doing, about strategies for investing and moving and getting all that in line. So I'm Dave Giesel. We got Corey and Mike Anderson on here. May have Mr. Joshua Bennett joining us a little bit later. But let's jump right in. We got the call-in line working today, by the way. I'm putting the number in the chat. Number in the right chat. It's been a rough morning. There we go. Number call-in line should be working. We'll test it at some point. Anyway, I wanted to start off by talking about the Dollar Vigilante Summit that we all watched, at least parts of at this point. So for those of you who don't know, Jeff Berwick did a online summit with, he had about 10 different folks on. He had Ed Bogos, who he writes the Dollar Vigilante with. Then he had Colin Cattell, Palisades Gold. He had this guy, the Market Sniper, YouTube guy. Then he had some people on with like farming and things like that. Ooh, that's pretty fancy. Whoa. Cool. Anyway, you guys have watched those. I know I watched most of those with Corey, and then we went back and watched a couple of them individually. Which ones have you had a chance to watch, Mike, or have you watched any of those ones yet?
I haven't watched any new ones since last week, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah,
okay.
The one with the crypto business guy.
Yeah, right. There was a guy, the guy who started the second day, and I don't remember what his name was. If we'll do some shameless promotion for Jeff here. I think it's tdv.com or tdvsummit.com. I'll put the link up. There you go. That's where you go to. It's like $100 or something to get access to the videos. There was Jeff's guest the second day was this guy talking about. He's an Australian guy, and he lived in Canada, the U.S., and he lived in the Caribbean. And he raised this question of where are you going to go? And he had ended up in the Caribbean for a while. And one of the things that he observed was that when he was there, he had some friends who were locals. I don't know how good of friends they were. And he said one day, they were kind of joking around, and these guys said, well, if anything bad ever happens on this island, like we, the locals, are going to eat you. Like you'll be sacrificial if things really go down here. And they were kind of joking, but they kind of weren't too. And he was like taken aback by that. And they said, well, I guess at least I appreciate the honesty. And his life circumstances changed a little bit. And
oops, David, we lost you for a bit there.
Yeah, I saw that. I paused a little bit. So he moved back to the States and kind of started building his family and everything. And then a couple years after he moved back, there was a hurricane that went through the Caribbean, and this island that he'd lived on got hit really bad. And as soon as it got hit, it was just like in the aftermath, it was all chaos and looting and burning houses down and all this stuff. And he was like, "Man, I'm glad I wasn't there for that." And he was like, these things these guys told him were echoing in his head. And I think Robert Higgs ran into a little bit of that during the first round of coronavirus panic in Mexico. He wrote a little bit about that. That um, he was viewed as the outsider where he was, and for the people who really got wound up about everything and were very afraid, they viewed him as the problem. You know, he's the gringo, and this is coming down from America now, and so he actually encountered that. Now we have some other, friends and associates of ours who are overseas who have not had that problem. So I think how integrated in a community is makes a difference. Um, but it was an interesting talking point from the summit. And one of the things the speaker brought up beyond that was that his ability to find communities of quote unquote, freedom loving people has been, it's never been better than in the States. Like when he was in Australia or Canada or the Caribbean or wherever, he's never been able to find as many like minded people. And he said, yeah, you can make a good case for the U.S. going in the wrong direction. Like 150 years ago with this move towards forced education, state education, then the Federal Reserve 100 years ago, all the wars, the growth of the police state, that's all really bad. But your communities of, libertarians, so to speak, and, left and right people who actually value freedom and autonomy, he said he hasn't found anything like that elsewhere. And his overarching point was if the U.S. really does go into the full-on collapse that a lot of people are thinking it will, and some people are hoping it will, it's not likely to be better anywhere else in general. And it's very likely that all places will move closer to tyranny if the U.S. falls, is kind of what he was saying. And so he wasn't saying that, you need to stay or you have to stay or any of those kind of things. He was just saying you might want to do what you can to help keep things from getting as bad as they could in the U.S. and to maybe encourage people in those American communities. And I know a lot of people who are, they're hunkering down here. They've made their decision. So that was an interesting perspective, and I had missed his talk when we were watching it live. I don't suppose you guys have watched that talk yet.
No, I think I missed the first talk of the second day.
Okay. Jeff, it actually made Jeff, think about that a little bit too. And Jeff was like, well, I'd rather not be in the middle of the Civil War. And the speaker was like, yeah, that's a good point. Being in the middle of the Civil War would be a bummer. But as things develop, supporting the elements that are worth supporting is worth thinking about. Supporting the elements that are opposed to authoritarianism, basically, which is likely to happen. Like if the United States breaks up, which I don't know, seems like it's been in the cards forever and it hasn't happened yet. There are likely to be areas that are just massive police states. Coastal California for sure, coastal New York State for sure, and then there are likely to be areas that aren't like that. Montana, northern Idaho, probably Wyoming, like a lot of the flyover states, so-called. And there's large areas where most of the resources in the United States actually come from. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting perspective on community, and I've heard a number of Alaskans express that too. And one of the frustrations of Alaskans is like there's a lot of live and let live up here, but there's quite a bit of nanny state mentality as well. It's a weird mix, and there's very few in the middle. I don't know. It seems like that to me. But so that was that really interesting, thought-provoking speaker. Second day of the TDV summit. More along the lines of having a plan together. Colin Cattell spoke about the coming boom in gold stocks and how to position for that. And his angle, he's not really a political commentator, which was kind of refreshing. He just said, hey, there's a big opportunity coming, and it's going to be chaotic, and it's going to be scary as far as like investment and money goes. And it's going to be the opportunity of a lifetime, which we've actually had like 3 or 4 of in our lifetime, strangely enough.
This year?
Yeah, well, we've had a few this year, right?
2 this year.
I was thinking since 2000.
Sure.
But yeah, this year there have at least been 2 or 3. So his company, Palisades Gold, I guess is his company. It's palisades.ca is the URL. It's a privately held company. It will be publicly traded soon. That company exists to get private placement shares of gold mining companies before they've really gone public and got funded. And so he will go and vet a gold mine when it's in the exploratory phase, and then if he likes it, his company will finance them to finish their drill plan and move towards production. And for financing them early on, he'll get what's called private placement, which is where you'll get say, let's say you get 1 million shares at 50 cents a share or something like that. And then you have an option to buy another 1 million shares at 50 cents a share anytime in the first year. So even if the stock gets listed and goes up, they still hold 1 million shares and can sell them contractually, or are obligated to sell them contractually at the lower price. And he said there's a lot of money to be made on gold mining stocks, especially when gold is going through the roof. But the real money is to be made on these private placements. But it's really hard to do on your own. There's a ton of paperwork. There's a ton of regulatory.
You need a lot of money.
Making a company. Yeah.
To get in the game.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So he's making a company that's doing that, and then you can buy shares in Palisades. And it was his talk with Jeff was pretty neat because Jeff Berwick got his sort of start chasing mining stocks in Vancouver. And he personally got a lot of these private placements. And he was joking with Colin about what a pain it was, back in the day with fax machines and stuff like that. And even now it's just this mess of paperwork. And Colin's like, yeah, that's why I'm doing Palisades. So that was a very interesting talk, and Palisades is something to look for if you're interested in investing in the coming gold, silver, particularly the gold mining stock boom. Palisades has a super interesting YouTube channel as well, Palisades Radio, and they have a bunch of different gold, silver, resource investor, scientist, engineer type people on there talking about everything from. They have a guy who's talking about the future of the carbon credit market. They had a guy who's talking about nuclear energy and uranium. They had a guy who felt that silver was an awful investment, and he talked for an hour about that. So their station isn't just like a monolithic, everyone in types units. They have all sorts of different guests on.
And even though that they are a resource,
So that's been,
even though that they're a resource company, they have people on that aren't. It's not just a bunch of gold bugs. They're interviewing people with counter positions as well.
yep, that's right. And they're talking about everything from, they had a guest on a couple days ago talking about what's likely long term and what's likely short term, and why you have to care about both of those things as far as taking advantage of the opportunities that are ahead of us. And so you're saying what's likely long term is there's all this unprecedented money creation, and that's going to end up somewhere. It's going to end up seeking yield. But what's likely short term is there's the second wave going on, and regardless of your opinions about it, the way that people are acting as individuals and then as governments and stuff like that, is people are getting ready for a second round of self-isolation, and which is different than quarantine, by the way. These words are being used incorrectly. Quarantine is when you've been diagnosed sick, and people are talking about 14-day quarantine when you arrive at your destination. That is isolation, not quarantine. And anyway, there's a bunch of language.
I think that confusion comes from ships being quarantined when they come into port. Because there can be sick people on the ship, but the whole ship gets put in quarantine, even though there's healthy people on it as well.
Mm-hmm.
When I first crossed into Canada, when this was beginning, I received a sheet of paper, and it outlined very clearly the difference between isolation and quarantine. And it said the 14-day self-isolation that you must adhere to is simply staying isolated, so that if you turn out to be sick, you won't have gotten anybody sick when you didn't have symptoms. And quarantine is something that's for sick people. The second time I entered Canada, the language had changed, and they said there's a mandatory 14-day quarantine, whether you're sick or not. Well, you can't quarantine if you're not sick. So anyway, there's language games that are being played.
I see.
Yeah. I don't know, or people have just decided to use the wrong words. But anyway, that's what's going on. And so in that situation, it's unlikely that gold and silver and all these mining stocks are going to go straight to the moon. What's likely is one more panic sell-off, in particular of stuff like oil and industrial metals. One more flight to dollars, maybe more than that, but at least one more. And then as things ease up again, that will be what ignites what, in this guy's opinion, the sustained boom. So he expects a pullback, like on gold, he expects a pullback to like 1600, 1650 level, something like that. And then that will be the lowest low that you'll see for the rest of your life. Because afterwards, in order to reinflate, like it took, $3 or $4 trillion for the Federal Reserve to reinflate markets this time. He expects it to take 7 to 10 trillion to reinflate markets next time. And that's going to be the match that finally lights the inflation. They had another guest on. This is Palisades Radio. They had another guest on again a couple days ago. This is one of the recent ones, and she was talking about the difference between price inflation and asset inflation. And like one of the mysteries of this Federal Reserve thing with all this new money created is that we haven't seen inflation in the consumer price index, the CPI. And
this is what Peter Schiff condenses into one thing. He just says inflation is going to go. It doesn't pull apart the different types.
Right. That's right. Yeah. He just says, oh, inflation, therefore gold. So she pointed out that there's a difference between price inflation, commodity price inflation and asset price inflation. And she said, most of the new money created has found its way into equities, into stocks and stuff like that. And so that's why consumer prices haven't gone up. Robert Wenzel talks about this a little bit. He says the price of things that people want will go up. And so almost all that money found its way back into stocks. And some of it found its way into the bond market, because bond yields in real terms are still very slightly positive. It's a little bit better than holding cash. So she says what will turn asset price inflation into commodity or goods price inflation is when bond yields are capped. So if the Federal Reserve has to create a really a larger pile of money than they have already, the only way they can keep the debt serviceable is the only way the U.S. government can is if they cap the long-term yields on the treasuries. And at some point, capping the yields is basically a statement that inflation is going to be higher than the yield. It's to contain the interest payments in the future. So when that happens, that makes treasuries actual loser, and so that'll either squeeze money into equities or into commodities like gold and silver. And her assertion of what's likely is that asset prices. So you talk about like the market cap on Apple. Apple is supposedly worth $1.5 trillion. It's been bid up to that. Is it really? Does it deliver that profitability? Well, I mean, it's hard to say. Her assertion is that no, that these equities are way, way overvalued. And at some point, that money will start looking for a better return on its investment. And as gold goes to, 1,800, where it's at now, 1,900, 2,000, that sector and the resource sector in general, other stuff like copper and silver, uranium, those are going to be way better returns on investment. And that's when this money starts flooding in. And even a very small, the resource sector is a teensy tiny sector. So she said, like, let's say the average portfolio manager decides to put half of his customers' money, 0.5% of his customers' money into silver. So here's a guy managing, let's say he manages, $100 million in portfolios, and he wants to put 0.5% in. A few people doing that would drive the silver market crazy because it's this teensy tiny little market. So a small amount of inflow coming out of bonds and coming out of equities into the resource sector will just blow it up. And then if it doubles or triples, then there's a bunch of news stories about it, and it goes into bubble territory really quickly just because it's so tiny, and because it'll be actually bearing some income. It'll be creating yield, which nothing else will be.
I was listening.
Yep. Go for it.
I was listening to Brett Johnson on Palisade Radio, June 18th. And he's the dollar milkshake guy, and he had a debate a year ago or this spring, I guess, with Peter Schiff about gold versus inflation versus deflation and gold prices. And he was kind of reevaluating his thing and just saying that he got he thinks that it's all still happening. His timing is just off, and it just hasn't happened yet. And he's very bullish on gold long term, but he said that a similar thing to what you were saying, that there's going to be a correction, and then it'll spike the second time. And his reason, he was not into the junior mining stocks, and the Palisades guy asked him why, and he said that his game is more large currency trades, and that his portfolio is just oriented towards that. So he says everyone should have gold, but he doesn't he doesn't get into evaluating the mining companies, so he doesn't invest in it. He just does other stuff. So he didn't disagree with that.
Sure, it's just not his specialty.
Not his jam.
And the thing that a lot of these folks talked about, and on Palisades Radio and on the TDD Summit, is there's going to be a lot of different opportunities in a lot of different sectors. You know, it's easy to talk about gold and gold mining because, you know, gold's this inflation hedge and gold mining is a leveraged version of that. But there'll be a lot of other opportunities. I've heard some people talking about oil as an opportunity, and there are all sorts of negative forces on oil. This is something that came out of the TDV Summit as well, which might be interesting to Alaskans in particular, which is one of the guys on the summit. His YouTube channel is the Market Sniper. If you just look up the Market Sniper on YouTube, you'll find him. And then he has another one, which is what the Collapse Sniper or something like that, which is like his quasi-political channel. Anyway, the Reset Sniper, that's what it is. He calls this a reset, which is great. He brought up the fact, which I was unaware of. I've looked into a bunch more. The Rockefeller family, who has held, you know, the largest controlling interest in oil, generally speaking, in the world for a long time, moved out of oil in 2016. They liquidated all their positions in oil in 2016 and moved into green. And so all of their marketing and lobbying efforts, there's the link to the Market Sniper, all their efforts have been in the direction of green energy now. So all the lobbying, all the NGO work and all that stuff. And so oil is just sort of another commodity now. It's been depoliticized. It, you know, obviously has not been depoliticized, but in a large way it has been depoliticized, with the Rockefellers being out of it. And so he was pointing out that kind of it has to compete on a different playing field now. And he was one of the guys who called the collapse of the oil market. He, at the Anarchapulco event I went to, he said he made a call to short oil. They had kind of this pool. There's kind of a betting pool where they said who can make the best call for the next 2 to 3 months, who can make the best forecast. And his was to massively short oil. And everybody's like, that's crazy. Like, oil's a stable commodity. Everybody needs it. And he had all these technical reasons and these fundamental reasons. And he ended up kind of winning that competition. And that's why he got invited on. Anyway, he is bearish on oil in the short term, but says it's likely to go up in the long term, just because of scarcity. Mike's talked about potential shortages of oil. And then on Palisades Radio, this lady who was on a couple days ago, Lynn, she was talking about long-term forces on oil. She expects it to go to 80 to 90 a barrel, partially due to inflation, but also partially due to the realignment of the economics of it. So this shale oil, this is a little bit of a rant, but it's relevant. The shale oil projects in the States have been driven by desire of the U.S. government to be energy independent, but it's not economic oil. Market Sniper talks about that too. It was never produced economically. And in this last coronavirus round, the Russians and Saudis sold a bunch of oil into the market at a loss. And the reason for that was likely if you can push the price down low enough for long enough, all of the shale oil producers are going to go bankrupt, to the point where even the banks who are supposed to be holding them up are going to give up. If you can get them to stop producing, and then you come back to normal market levels, they'll never be able to make the case that they can produce profitably, not at 40 or 50 a barrel. At 60 or 70, you can kind of almost start to make the case. So that's what's going on now. A bunch of them have stopped producing, so there's less production. And now the Russians in particular are interested in oil price so they can actually make some money. Like they sold a lot of oil at a loss, to the point where their government was running at a surplus for a couple of years, and this year it'll be running at a massive loss just because of the below market price oil sales. So anyway, that's only a short-term trend. So now a lot of this production has been removed. Demand is coming back online, even if there's a second wave. Well, there we are. In the long term, a 1 to 2 year window, demand is likely to occur, at least mostly. And if there's less production and there's more demand, and there's inflation pressure, that's going to drive the price up, especially if oil companies are profitable, or the ones who are left. So she was saying, $80, $90 a barrel wouldn't surprise her. So that's another opportunity in the whole thing. And it could be interesting for Alaska, because Alaska's break-even price on oil right now, I think, is, for producers up here, I think it's around $41 a barrel. They're marginally profitable right now, but in an 80 or 90 a barrel world, it could be pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
But in the turmoil, there's a lot of these opportunities out there, and it's been very interesting in the last couple of weeks, listening to all these perspectives, and getting away from inane news, that isn't, I live basically in the woods. I think all of us kind of, if you live in Alaska, you kind of live in the woods, unless you have a condo or an apartment in the city or something like that. So we all sort of live in the woods anyway. So regardless of what happens with, isolation or lockdown or whatever, our lifestyle doesn't change that much. So why not look at information that's relevant? Why do I care what the rules are in New York City for coronavirus? It just doesn't matter. So it's been interesting to spend that time looking around to see what the bigger trends are, and to see what people think about the opportunities that are around, and then doing something about them. Positioning, so you can buy this commodity, or you can watch this price, or you can reorganize your assets in this direction. All of those things. It's been a good couple weeks for that.
If I can jump in for a second, there was a Berwick talk on Dollar Vigilante 2-3 weeks ago, and he wasn't posting very regularly for a little while, and he went to some hotel in the mountains, and he said he was doing some hiking, and he said, get out and talk to people, and don't bring your computer type of stuff. Just spend time in the woods, because it's good for you. And over the weekend of the 4th, got kind of a late start with mechanical issues, but went camping and was gone for like 2.5 days. And mentally, it was very good to get away from the phone and the news, and you get in all these habits that you don't even realize checking. I know everybody knows this, but it's just bringing a field report back as a reminder that it's very refreshing to get away from that stuff, and it lets you focus on things that are normally drowned out. So whatever you choose to bring with you, that's kind of like your intent for the trip, and then you can go away and just work on that, and it's really nice. So I highly recommend getting away for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, and talking about trading opportunities and where to go, it all kind of links together. I mean, if you on when you look on the world situation, or Europe is in a much worse situation than the U.S. And as will be the third world, emerging markets. 70% of the paper dollars are circulating outside of the U.S. And right now, you have a crisis with the euro. Where are they going to put their money? In addition to that, they have a limit. What is it? I think it's a €500 limit that they can take out of out in cash at a time now. So it's useless. The whole and then they also have a limit on actually a ban on purchasing gold for a lot of people in Europe. So their option is now similar to what they had during the Great Depression, and that is to move their wealth into dollars and just park it in U.S. equities. So then traditionally they would put it into the Dow. So you're looking at a great trading opportunity coming with the Dow as Europe comes down. The third world is in a situation where they aren't going to be able to service the debts that were based in dollar denominations, and so you're going to see huge defaults throughout the third world and emerging markets. And so when you put all this together, the U.S. As far as currencies go, the dollar is going to be the last to go, and that's leading me to the conclusion that the U.S. might be the best safe haven at the moment. It's like, look at Spain. I mean, Spain is now mandating that everyone wear a mask if they go outside. I couldn't imagine living in that. I wouldn't put up with it. Or why are they putting up with it? So perhaps the U.S. and perhaps Alaska is one of the best places in the world to be right now. Our only drawback is the survivability of the winters. It becomes kind of difficult if you don't have the amenities of modern life, right? So
especially with this whole global warming thing falling through. Like if global warming had worked out, Alaska would be great, but it just isn't happening.
Right. So where are we gonna? Are we going to save ourselves from the societal collapse, but submit ourselves to the next ice sheet that gets laid over the top of us? No, I guess it's choose your poison, right? So that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm at this point. Alaska looks like a pretty decent opportunity or option versus anywhere else in the world. I don't want to go to a place like the Caribbean where they just tell you, well, yeah, we're just going to eat you, like you're pointing out earlier, Dave. That one guy that was down there saying.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to have a chat with Robert Higgs about his experience.
It would be.
And Josh has talked about bringing him on. Jeff Berwick hasn't had that experience, and a lot of the guys at the summit, I think 4 of the guys at the summit live in Panama, and they haven't had that experience there. They've had the negative experience of Panamanian restrictions on travel during this time have been pretty intense, like when you can leave the house and stuff like that. But a number of them live out of the city, and it's kind of like in the U.S. If you're out of the city, it's not a big deal.
Right.
But it would be interesting. It would be interesting to get some other perspectives on that. Yeah, the U.S. is likely the last to go. Although, so this was very interesting. Lynn, I'm going to look up her name because man, she was spot on Palisades Radio. Lynn Alden. Lynn Alden. Yeah, worth listening to. She talked about if countries were to decide to back their currencies by gold, just hypothetically speaking. I think Russia has 19% now. They have 19% reserve in gold, which is crazy.
And low debt.
And low debt. Yeah, right. They were actually they were running a surplus until this year on their budget. So she was talking about, she's not a gloom and doomer, or doesn't come across as like a political, libertarian type. Like she might be, but that wasn't the point of what she was talking about. But she was sort of alluding to these like scenarios where if a currency had to actually support itself or support its claims about its value, there are some of these foreign currencies that could emerge pretty well, with Russia being the most backed by gold, which was another odd point that you brought up, Mike. Is like maybe Russia's maybe Russia's the winner of all of this in the long term.
Yeah.
Certainly, the U.S. is still there's a strong case for the U.S. being a reasonable place to be now and the last place to go. When it
Yeah.
goes, that might not be awesome
Mhm.
because as big as it is, well, if it goes, as big as it is, that'll probably be messy. But then in the aftermath, it's probably a Russia-China world if that happens. Anyway,
Yeah, yeah, and with the currencies too, keep in mind that when when the Fed issues money, it has to be backed by some debt. They have to have some debt to back it. Uh, with the ECB, that's not the case. They can just print. They literally can just print money with nothing, with not even a debt backing. And so, and the other thing is to keep in mind is that Europe in the past would regularly cancel their currencies. It's never happened in the U.S. You could still spend a Civil War dollar, and it's not it hasn't been canceled. So historically, the dollar is still um, a better opportunity simply because it actually is backed by something. It's debt, but it's something, and it doesn't get canceled. So after all this stuff goes down, if they issue Fed coin, for example, if they manage to issue that, the paper dollar will still be usable because it's still legal tender. It still has to be accepted, right? They'd have to erase that law that it's not legal tender to not be able to use it, and it's never happened. So if you have your cash out, if you have your cash out of the bank, you have $100,000 in 10 years, and they have Fed coin running, and it's like road warrior situation. As long as they're still in Washington D.C., it's still legal tender. Um, so another thing to keep in mind. Uh, Also, and this is a negative point. If you want to leave the country, probably ought to do it soon because the State Department still has not opened up the passports. If your passport is about to expire, you're not going to get one. You're not going to be able to leave the country. And I was talking to my wife earlier before the show, and she was telling me about her dad in Russia. And in this, when he was younger, he was in the Russian Navy for 2 years. They have a 2-year mandatory service for all males. And when he got out, he wanted to travel around. Well, he lived out in the village, and they would not issue a passport to him, so he couldn't leave. The whole point is they wanted to keep people in the villages to produce the food for the people in the cities. They didn't want people to leave the villages. And uh, the America is now getting the internal passport. This October, you get the real ID. That's an internal passport. That's all it is. If they don't want you to leave, to move around, they can just say you can't have one.
They can't. They delayed that another year.
Oh, did they just delay it again?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah,
Ne-
and
Next
uh,
October.
next October. Okay. So yeah, we have another year reprieve now. At some point, they're going to. It's it's an attempt for a Bolshevik revolution. So at some point, they'll try to implement that. My belief is that they're going to ultimately fail. I don't think it's going to succeed like it did in the Soviet Union. Um, because we're kind of seeing the collapse of Marxism. We're seeing the last hurrah, I think. But there may be a
that's
period of
optimistic.
time. Yeah, no, there may be a period of time when you won't be able to move around because they won't issue you the paperwork to do so. So if you want to go somewhere, uh, you kind of need to think about where to go right now
Well,
before
where
your
can you go
passport
right now?
expires.
Where can you go? Even with a
That's
passport. There's like
right.
26 countries in the world that will accept Americans right now.
Yeah,
And
and yeah,
it's like Timbuktu,
uh-huh.
crap in the corner, and toilet bowl over here. They'll let
Uh-huh.
Americans in. Everyone else is like, nope.
Well, I saw
Literally.
Barbados.
We look at that map. There is no place for Americans to go right now.
Well, I did see Barbados has just started up a new program. They're trying to attract outsiders, and It's an easy path to passport, and you can go to Barbados.
Mhm.
I
A Canadian friend told me about that yesterday.
Yeah. So look up that if you want to go there. There are a few places you can go, but yeah, most of them are being shut down. Uh, I was leaning toward going to Russia, partly because they don't buy the whole Corona hoax thing. They've opened up internally. Half the population there uh, knows it's a hoax. At least half the population. They say they're not going to take the vaccine. Russia itself has put Bill Gates on a blacklist and won't let him in. Uh, and for those reasons, it looks okay. But I can't get there right now because they're still closed to travel. Um, uh, so yeah, we live in that world now where my wife's parents are again behind an iron curtain, right? So
Yeah,
uh,
it's weird. You can there. I think Mexico you can still go into, but some
mhm,
of the states in Mexico have nationally there's no restriction, but some of the states have restrictions. But yeah, it's very interesting, and
mhm,
the border wall, like there's these 200, isn't it 200 smart towers or whatever going up along the border?
mhm.
Like, who are those for?
Yeah,
Because like the Cubans came on rafts to Florida. Anyway, yeah,
yeah,
it's a weird
um,
time.
yeah,
Do you think?
and
Well, what do
I
you
wonder
think
which way they're
might?
pointed.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, they probably have
yeah,
turrets that can turn or whatever.
yeah.
I don't know. What do you think about? So during, let's talk. We could talk about the Spanish flu just for fun,
Mm,
because that's everybody's favorite topic.
mhm,
Uh, there was a lot of restriction of movement during the Spanish flu. What one of the was the Bahamas or something? I don't know. There was no American Samoa. That's what it was. They actually closed all their ports for 2 years. Like really, really closed them. Like the border between the U.S. and Canada, for example, right now, it isn't actually closed. Like pro tip, if you want to cross, you can. Um, but they actually really
They
closed.
turned ships around. Ships would come
Yep,
and they'd tell them to leave.
yep. And they that was an effective strategy for them as far as avoiding the Spanish flu. But it was like 2 years, but of course they opened it after that, and I guess that means they were food. They must have been self-sufficient on food.
mhm.
Anyway, this
You can
time,
let your food sit for a couple weeks or whatever before you open
when
it
it
up.
comes in, yeah, you can offload the ship. So what's interesting this time is that the suspicion that things will. There's a large number of people. I mean, us in particular, but there's other people who don't believe that things will return to normal, regardless of uh, the legitimacy of the COVID-19 threat. Um, Historically, when there have been diseases and restrictions of movement, they've returned to normal. Things have returned when the disease is gone. But there's a lot of people who don't think that'll happen this time around, which I think is super interesting, because everything's been trending in the wrong direction as far as I don't know, honesty and reversing policy. Like, every emergency measure that's been implemented in the states in the last 50 years has become permanent. I mean, I can't think of one that's gotten reversed.
Mhm.
So, um, as far as restriction of movement for people's own good, the state has dug itself quite a hole on the PR side, where even if that was needed, if that was the right thing to do to solve the issue of a pandemic, they've burned all their goodwill. And so there's very little reason to believe that they would ever rescind any of those restrictions,
Mhm.
even in the absence of a global disease. So, but what do you think about that? I mean, what do you think? things would look like in 2 years. What do you think the odds are that the restrictions will be eased as either the narrative runs out of steam or the virus runs out of, people to infect, whatever you believe on that?
Yeah, the restrictions always increase. Now, if you're talking about going back to the 1918 flu, if we're talking about face masks, for example, that's one of the big ones. There were cities that required the use of face masks. I think New York was one of them. There are a lot of places that required the use of face masks at the time. And subsequent studies of the event showed that they made absolutely no difference on the spread of the virus. Now, eventually that stuff went away, but those were local regulations. They weren't federal. If that became a federal law, I could see that staying. For municipalities implementing it, I can see it coming and going because, they tended to come and go. For businesses like, Alaska Airlines is requiring people to have their burqa on going on the plane, right? Unless you have a medical condition. You can tell them you have a medical condition that prevents you from wearing one, then you're okay. But
I require 21% oxygen.
That's right. Yeah, no, you don't even have to tell them why. It's a violation of HIPAA if they ask you why.
They can't ask you. Yeah.
Right. So you could sue them. Tell them you're going to sue them if they ask, right? But yeah, you can just tell them you have a medical condition and and just go on without it. But that's become a fad. I mean, look at all the styles of masks that have come out, and none of them actually work. They're just a style. They're like bell-bottom jeans. And so they're corporately enforcing a style. And honestly, I hope Alaska Airlines goes out of business on the next lockdown for what they've done. I really do. I hope they go out of business for it and have to get replaced by some new airline. But as far as going into 2022, the big events are going to be in Europe. You're going to see massive separatist movements continuing and increasing in Europe. We see a lot of stuff going on in the U.S. with the BLM and Antifa crowd, but that's going to happen. You're really going to see it in Europe as things get worse. They're popping up as the economies fall apart and people don't have jobs and they can't pay for their rent, and so they're just going to protest. We want a free place to live. We want a free car. We want free education, free this, free that. And so you're really going to see it in Europe. And then you're going to see it in the U.S. And I would think 2022 to 24 is when you're really going to see an increase here. And also during the election, we'll see what happens during the election.
You're optimistic.
Yeah,
I don't even have a 2022 on my calendar.
There's a new era. That's year zero.
It barely gets into 21 and then it just disappears. Reset. One of the things though, Mike, that it's not going to ever be a federal issue because oddly enough, this coronavirus thing has really we've seen the strength of states in federalism. It's been kind of funny where you guys remember when Trump was spouting, I can do whatever the heck I want. I'm the president. If I say they open, and all of a sudden the state said, 10th Amendment, none of them ever cared about it before. But it's lawfully in the U.S. legal system, it still holds some power. So really, I think the best chance America has for lockdown 2 is individual states saying no. And the people in those individual states saying no. And a lot of it's got to be those individual states, especially Republican states, have to do it knowing that it's knowing that it's being used as a political weapon against their president, the Republican president. And the other part of it too, they have to understand that. Well, some of them will understand. I hope the federal government has no money. They're not necessarily going to bail out the municipalities. Trump has already said no, so they can't risk. Some of these states just can't risk going into a lockdown because it will destroy their economy. Like end of it, it's already destroyed. It's already down 40%. The 40% unemployment. I mean, real terms, we're at over 50 million people out of work. There's another 1.33 million this week. New unemployment again, and people aren't going back to work. In New York City, I just saw 40% of rents in New York haven't been paid since March. I mean, think about the intertwining of all that. Everything's connected with rents. When you don't pay your rent, the poor guy that needs the rent can't pay his mortgage, and he can't. And he might have it mortgaged through another mortgage, and that they can't service their mortgage. And it's a tidal wave. We're literally looking at a tidal wave of not just bankruptcies, but people just being done. Like, I don't know, they'll either give up or they don't have any choice. It's just over. And if they lock down again, the other 60% that's still somewhat viable, talking about transportation. What am I thinking of? With parts and pieces, David, when you're buying stuff, all the states depend on each other for supply chains, right?
Oh, supply chain, yeah.
This state makes stuff and that state doesn't. Well, you can't have half the country out of business and the other. Well, and it's not even half. We're really only talking about like 11 states that have pushed back at all. 11. I think, is that the same number of states that separated during the Civil War? But they're going to have to make a choice because, like, New York, you're done. New York, you're done. If you lock down again, the whole Eastern Seaboard, if you lock down again, there won't be anything left for you to open up to. Everyone can't be on welfare. Everyone can't be on the dole. There will be nothing. When they talk about, our supply chains or this and that, if no one's working, you won't be able to buy jack anyways because it won't be on the shelf.
Yeah, and
it can't shut down again. It can't.
Right. Yeah, and that's what you just brought up is actually the argument for the president to be able to order states to open up again, because the economy of one state affects the economy of another state because of the trade, and under the Commerce Clause, the feds would have power over opening or over ordering states to open up, and so that was one of the big issues that came about, or big arguments that came about during the last lockdown. We talked about it a little bit, but that's the president's supreme argument is that the under the Supreme Court rulings, the feds do have the power to order states to open up because they affect the other states.
Right, with the commerce laws and all that. Commerce Clause and blah, blah.
Right, which is going to cause more. Yeah, it's going to cause more animosity between the Soviet states and the rest of them.
Which is good. I mean, anytime the government's fighting itself, we can cheer that on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
that's fine.
That could take months and months and months for them to figure that out once it gets to whatever court they want to take it to.
The tension's okay, too. The states don't need to agree. I mean, that wasn't the intent. The intent of the Constitution wasn't for states to agree with each other. Exactly. It was for them to tolerate each other enough to have a free trade zone.
It was, part of it was these guys can't tolerate each other. They hate each other. So let's make a little agreement so we can trade between the states. That's about all. I mean, there was a big black underlying thing that we all know happened, but on the surface, that's kind of what it was all about.
We have a caller on.
Create a new empire to rule the world. Always got to throw that part in.
That's right. That was an accident. Okay, we got a caller on. Let's see if this works. It's always a blast. Can you hear us, caller? Let me check the settings here. 1 second.
Just waiting to hear. This is Randy.
This is Randy. All right. Can you do this number here? You got us there, caller? Apparently not. Oh, you know what? Check this out. You know what? You got to plug both ends of the cable in. Really weird. Okay.
In and out.
We got you now.
Just now.
You got us there?
Okay, let me shut you off my YouTube speaker here. Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah.
Hello? Okay.
Yes.
This is Rick.
Sound good.
Okay.
Good talking to you, Rick.
So,
Lay it on us. What are your thoughts here?
Well, you're making me think, that things are, how much longer is the U.S. going to stay together as a country? I just heard something about a Supreme Court decision that allows the tribes to basically take their land back.
In
Have you heard
Oklahoma.
anything about that?
Yeah, the Supreme Court
In
ruled
Oklahoma,
that
yes.
half of Oklahoma is a
And the other
Indian
4 or
reservation.
5 tribes are going to sue.
I was thinking that's going to start happening more often. Is that maybe part of the breakup of the U.S. is that it gets turned into a bunch of Indian reservations?
Well,
Wouldn't that be funny?
well, the interesting thing is that I guess if the other tribes sue on this same, using the same formula, that they will take over all of it. Have you seen, there's a map that shows all of the territory they're claiming, and based on treaties with the U.S. in the past, and it's gaining ground. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't know. It may be, anything that impairs the U.S. government in some fashion is, I guess, to some degree to be, approved of. But my point is that, they're looking at this. There's just so many cracks going on right now, and this is just another one in there. Are we looking at the breakup in the states? We've got California doing their thing and New York doing their thing. There's, as you were saying earlier, there's so much of the federalism going on now compared to previously. What do you think about that?
When Josh was talking about it, I was reminded of everybody's favorite song by Martika, "Toy Soldiers." Number one 80s hit. I think it's about drug use, but the chorus applies, to what we're seeing right now. I just put it in the comments.
Oh, that's a terrible memory right there.
Bit by bit, torn apart. We never win, but the battle wages on for toy soldiers. That's right. I would play it, except YouTube will yank our video. Then. Once we get streaming on BitChute and Library, it's going to be on with the 80s songs.
All day long.
I don't necessarily think the tension is a bad thing. States are way too, in my opinion, states are way too uniform, and that's one of the challenges with like the COVID-19 situation is if you have a different opinion, regardless of what it might be, if you think that if you're of the opinion that masks and stuff like that are effective and everything, you're in the mix with people who have another opinion, and part of that's just life, and the other way around. If you are not of the opinion that masks work, and both sides will say science is on my side, and Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It appears to me to be opinions on both sides, just like with everything, which is great. And I have my own opinion. But there's no states used to be
But
pretty.
politically, it seems to line up, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Now states used to be more stratified, is what I'm saying. Like, so in particular, like you could talk about like Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, right? Or Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. They used to be very different. Like that's part of the reason Pennsylvania existed, was people were leaving New England because they had radically different opinions, and people were killing each other over it. Like it was way worse than it is now. And so you got these states that were very different, and that's all been watered down mostly. Well, I don't know. Again, my opinion. There's so much federal law that applies across all the states that there's this idea that states have to have uniform laws, and it just is not the case. That's not the point. And so if states can become more different, I think the United States might be a more harmonious zone, because you could move. You could move without leaving the country. You could move without having to get a new passport, and you could move without.
That was kind of the original intent, wasn't it? That each state would, be an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's this uniformity. It's this race to uniformity now, or it appears to be. But it doesn't need to be. The California and New York don't need to be removed from the United States for the United States to work. The federal government just needs to lose its the power that people give it regulatorily, which is great. I mean, regardless of whether you agree with what Governor X, Y, or Z is doing, at least governors are finding their religion, so to speak.
Yeah, maybe the decision by the Supreme Court on Oklahoma will be a good thing for the Real ID Act. If they're not, if their own nation.
Real ID Act?
Yeah, they're all these reservations becoming their own nation. Are they going to be taking Real ID?
Oh. Huh. One of the things that I heard is that if I don't know if you're aware of this, but all native lands, all the reservations are put. How is that put? They're under a trustee, and that trustee is Congress. And so Congress has all the power to make and change native laws with the assent of the tribal voice, or the tribal assembly. And so in the past, only natives were subject to tribal law. If you were Caucasian or a non-native on tribal land, you were still subject to the state, or whatever the case may be. And so it will be interesting to see with these changes if people who live in these tribal lands, in these, because if they take over Oklahoma, we're talking. It will be interesting to see how that works out, because we're being pushed against each other right now in these racial dimensions. Which behind it is the Marxist, socialist, communist push, and it's just interesting to see where that's going to go.
I think it'll just be a payout, Rick. Reparations.
What's that?
I think it'll just end up just into a reparations payout.
I don't know. Because here's the thing is, there's a bigger agenda behind that, right? It's not just reparations. There's a bigger agenda here, and that's global control of you and me.
Well,
Yeah.
and the way they've always worked is to break up to break up civilizations into small pieces and then try to unify them under some gigantic thing. It's what they've been doing with the Middle East, intentionally breaking up
Get us to fight
the
each other,
alliances there.
get us to fight each other, and then come in as the savior.
Right.
Well, see, that's what I'm saying with the Indian, with the Supreme Court thing. So, all things normal, then, I mean, the federal government, states can't have another sovereign entity ruling a section of land inside of its borders. They're never going to allow that. It's just not going to happen. So, if things
Except
stay
Chaz.
That
normal,
sounds like they are, though. It sounds like
No.
they are, Josh.
no, they won't.
To some degree. However,
They are right now because
it's still the ultimate arbiter.
we're living in la la land right now, though, because I mean, if things still progress, what I'm saying is that if things stay normal, they'll just end up having a big payout. Now, the other side of it, like things aren't normal and the end of the world's coming, so I don't think any of that's going to matter anyways. I mean, Supreme Court, who are they? They're not. Anything that comes out of those guys' mouth isn't going to mean squat in a few months. Who cares what they say?
Mm-hmm.
Who cares what the governor? I mean, there's going to be people that say, "Who cares what a governor says? Who cares?" But we're heading down. Who cares what authority says? Your authority because of what? You wear a black robe. People already hate the Supreme Court. They hate I mean, the word anarchy comes to mind, but like authority is really going down the tubes. No one wants to obey the authority. There's more authority and social pressure right now than there is authority from the federal state governments. There's way more authority and social pressure.
They burned up all their legitimacy.
Yeah,
They used it up.
Well,
Yeah, and they're going to. Yeah, they're the more people push back, the more authoritarian they're going to try to become. So you're going to see that in coming years.
Years.
But it's already not working, which is kind of
It's
interesting.
already, yeah, but they're gonna keep pushing. They're gonna push harder, and you're gonna see a real surge in authoritarianism coming in the near future, next few years. We haven't seen anything yet.
So I'm hoping they've overplayed their hand and it's really driving people to wake the hell up. Because it does seem like more and more people are, just the regular people, at least here in the U.S., are starting to go, hell no, we're not going to do that. We're not going down for a second lockdown. I don't know. I'm thinking, we can't afford that anymore, and I see it all over the place. I'm talking to people, in my workspaces, etc. And they're required to wear masks for their work or whatever. But I always bring it up in conversation. It's like, so what do you think about this mask requirement or whatever? And it's like, it's bullshit. They don't believe it. And nobody that I've run into so far really believes it. They're all, even in the stores and stuff, you see all the stuff people are wearing. I really think that's going to be hard fought. Did you guys see that letter to the editor from the mayor? It was about a week ago or so.
No.
Where he was talking about, he was saying wear a mask. Just wear a mask. And to me, this racist thing, all of this is part of they're all part of a whole piece, part and parcel, getting you to obey, and getting you to fight amongst your neighbors, etc. And so, I just was so, everything I have seen is, you go and look at that, what are those called? Random, it's a random something trial. What is that? You guys, it's basically the gold standard for scientific trials. And there's been like 9 of those done.
So
We lost him.
we
know-
lost
Hold on, guys.
Mr.
Well,
Rick.
One of the things I wanted,
Dicey phone line.
one of the things I wanted to say to him was that when he's talking about the mask, people are wearing them, but they say blah blah. I don't believe in it. Yada yada. I think right now, maybe the whole world, but at least Americans are in the obey for reward mode right now. When a lot of times you tell your kids, if you do this, Dad'll give you a piece of candy. Well, I always do that. Like, hey, look what I got. Mom's like, you don't got a bird. But we're in the obey reward mode right now. So people are willing to obey it to a certain extent because they're being told, if you do this, we'll reward you at such and such a time where you won't have to do this anymore. Well, you're doing this now to make it better later. You're doing, the lockdowns. We're locking down now so we don't have to lock down all year. We're locking down now so we don't all die. So people are willing to obey to a certain extent. I think what's going to happen is when they find out that their obedience leads to more suffering and it's going to lead to more rules, that'll be the time we'll find out whether people are going to push back or not. Because I've listened to a lot of different radio shows around the country lately, just because specifically just to hear their tone. What are they talking about? What's their, when they're talking about their news or whatever, and they're all saying the same thing. All of them are saying the same thing still. Well, they told us blah, blah, blah back then. Now they're changing the rules. They're changing the rules. And everyone knows that as we go along, the game plan changes. The rules of the game changes. The outcome changes. The goals keep changing every minute. The goals keep changing. And people can only put up with that so much because right now there's still hope. Everyone still has a little bit of hope of, even the people that are full on believers in the virus, everything they say about it, they still have hope on the other side that things will go back to normal. Most people with any sort of brain cells know if they get locked down again starting in October till next April, May, there's no coming back. There is no coming back from that.
No, and another thing is that people will continue to do what they're told, no matter how bad it is, as long as there is an expectation that if they don't, it'll get worse.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, that's also a factor to look at is where do you want to live? What will people put up with in the area that you're at? It's like when I was talking about my wife's dad, my father-in-law in Russia, they weren't allowed to leave their village, right? So I asked her, because they didn't have any passport. Well, why didn't the village people just go and shoot the checkpoint guards? Well, they didn't have any willingness to do it. So I would ideally like to be around people who would have a willingness to go shoot the checkpoint guards.
That was kind of this guy on the TDV summit. That was kind of his point.
Mm-hmm.
Is in America, even the police and military, maybe especially the police and military, there are guys in there who are constitutionalists, and they're just, they're confused a little bit. As a lot of the police aren't too. We know some of the Oath Keepers guys who are cops, and they were all about the Constitution. There's a large number of law enforcement LEOs, law enforcement officers who are that way, and that's showing up with some of the unconstitutional laws that are happening now. They're saying, well, regardless of whether or not this action is a good idea, I'm not going to enforce it because it's not legally enforceable. And his point was that name another country where that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can name other countries that have less enforcement ability, which is a different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And you can talk about, where would you, if the United States balkanizes, if it turns into these islands of different political opinion, and breaks up as an entity, being stuck in that shuffle might not be the ideal thing. You might want to be on the sidelines for that process. But you're still likely to find, after the balkanization is complete and all the people who want to live in the Chaz have moved to the Chaz, and removed themselves from everybody else, you might have something to move back to. There's a lot of different ways to play that. But his point about what you just said, Mike, about, people having the willingness to go and say, you're not actually in charge, because no one's above anyone else, truthfully. That is a cultural idea that's basically unique to Americans.
Yeah, and at least Alaska seems to have more than its fair share of it compared to the rest of the country still. So
sure,
and if the economic conditions get bad enough that a lot of people end up leaving the state, maybe it'll be the ones with a good share of that mentality that will end up staying.
That would be the hope, and that's one of the one of the reasons for this being episode 464 about the opportunities in the second lockdown is if we act on what we believe is coming, we believe evidence supports, we can be in pretty good shape. We can be pretty well positioned on the other side. And that was like the TDV summit. That was like the theme of it. It was like, if you think everything's going to be hunky-dory, you wouldn't be watching this. You wouldn't be watching these videos. You already think things aren't going to be hunky-dory. So get your ducks in a row. If you get your ducks in a row and you weather the storm, this is the Noah's Ark thing that Jordan Peterson talks about. Noah did not wait until it was raining to start building the ark. He built it for years and years and years and years and withstood a large amount of ridicule. Well, if it's not raining, the clouds are pretty dark right now. And if people get their ducks in a row, things on the other side could be pretty good. The Chazes of the world will have worthless paper to spend as money, and very little ability to project their will into the world, and to trade and to be productive and build wonderful lives. And the people who get their ducks in a row are going to be in a lot better shape for doing that. So now's the time to get ready for that. And then there's many different ways to move through it, I think, which is what you're pointing out. There's a bunch of different ways to move through it. That was a cool thing that came out of the summit too, was there was no single consensus. Like this one guy said, he lived in the Midwest. He said, I'm gonna stay here. This is as good as it gets. I've been a bunch of places. This is as good as it gets. Then there was another guy talking about ways to generate your own really, really rich soil. If you, say you live in a condo and you have a little patio and you need to grow food, you can actually grow a substantial amount of food. He was talking about that. He's like, not everybody's going to be able to leave. If you're stuck, these are the type of skills you'll need to do okay through it. And then other people were talking about, go to Panama, go to Portugal, whatever. They were talking about these places where you could weather the storm. So there's a lot of different strategies.
And they all might be right.
They all might be right. And the people are different. So the goal would be to not have your, which we're all talking about, not have your head in the sand, and do some prep. Do some prep to be ready on the other side. Because being in a good position on the other side is probably as good as it gets right now. There's no option to avoid some hardship. That's, like you were saying, Josh, like that's already baked in. Everybody's out of a job. All these businesses are not coming back. And it's going to be way worse than it could have been. But doing the prep, getting through it.
Well, yeah, when you look at things like, just for some examples, the mothership, the corporation that owns Pizza Hut and Wendy's, right? I've seen Pizza Hut and Wendy's since I was born, basically. They just declared bankruptcy. They're pretty, that was probably the biggest, whoa, to me, to see that bankruptcy happen, and they're going to shut down. They have 1,800 facilities. They're going to shut most of them down. GNC declared bankruptcy. Bed Bath and Beyond, ladies, control yourself, but they're shutting down tons of their stores. There was that. They've been around since like 1700 and something. A men's dress store or something. They just declared.
Oh, Brooks Brothers.
Yeah, Brooks. They just declared bankruptcy.
Yep.
You've been around forever, but if you don't go to an office, you probably don't need. You're not going to dress up in your suit to sit at home. That's Wenzel's point on that whole thing. And so, there's real. Each one of those, you think about 1,800 facilities closing down. Well, there's probably 10 people in each one of those.
Mm-hmm.
So all those people just lost their job, and there's probably way more than 10 actually. But let's just say 10. That's a lot of people. And there's another option that you don't have. Not necessarily. Not like, well, I can't go to Wendy's, but all these things are different options that we've been used to all of our lives that are disappearing right in front of our eyes. It's amazing. But it's not fantasy land. It's actually happening to us.
Doug Casey had an interesting point about that. He said he had a talk at the TDV Summit as well. And I'm not getting commissioned for promoting it, but if you go to tdvsummit.com, it's like $100. You get to watch all the videos. It's a pretty good use of $100. D's Nuts in the comments actually paid our subscription fee so we could watch it, which appreciate that. Anyway, he said he's not a conspiracy guy because he said you get 2 or 3 friends together, it's hard enough to pick a place to go to lunch. So he's not a conspiracy guy. But he said, okay, you have, let's talk about historically, you have like the Spanish flu, which is pretty bad. It kills a bunch of people, millions of people worldwide. And then you have the seasonal flu, which varies. It can be pretty bad. And then he went through some of these other epidemics from the last, say, 200 or 300 years in Europe and in the U.S. And he said, okay, regardless of all those, and different countries had different responses. He said there was never a global economic shutdown, even during the Spanish flu, which took 2 to 3 years to play out. There was not a global economic shutdown. And economic activity is not about money; it's about survival. Like you were saying, Josh. I mean, this involves like the food supply and sanitary items and fuel, and heat, basic resources. And there's a few people who have pointed out like this starvation kills way more people every day than coronavirus by the official numbers. And so there's much bigger things going on. But the hyperfixation, this is Jordan Peterson talks about the Cyclops as a mythological figure. The Cyclops has one eye, and it's this big, strong thing, but it only has one eye, so it can only see one thing from one perspective. And it hyper-focuses on that. And that's what makes it weak. It doesn't matter how big and strong it is. It can only focus on one thing. And when it focuses on that one thing, it's to the detriment of everything else that's going on. And it's been amazing how the news, the media in particular, has kept the entire world focused on one thing that you could say is a lot worse than the regular flu. You could say that. You could take that opinion. You could look at the numbers that way. But it still is nothing compared to the global shutdown and the effects that's going to have. It's way worse. Like the other effects are way worse. Doug Casey talked about that. And he said he was astounded that the whole world would move in lockstep together. He said, I'm not a conspiracy guy, but this has never happened before. And people might say that the whole world is enlightened enough now that they can all agree to take this course of action. But the singularity, the singular way of acting and the singular viewpoint is is going to come at a really, really, really high cost.
Mm.
A really high cost. I mean, it already is, but it's like the effects of inflation happen after the inflation. The prices of food and stuff going up happen way after the money was created, and the effects of this are going to be felt for years and years and years. And it's going to result in a bunch of deaths. There's going to be a bunch of poverty and challenges that are going to result in the deaths of a lot of people due to secondary causes. It's the way it works.
Starvation,
drug use, from being homeless or being jobless,
mental
malnutrition.
health. Yeah.
There's going to be mental health. Yeah, it's going to be, the ripples they'll go out for years.
Something interesting too. Casey was good. He's all in on the inflation stuff. But that was interesting, even to the point where he was, he didn't say you could. He was like, look, if you have a home mortgage, leverage that baby out. Get the cash. He was saying to use, not just, have cash in my, buy gold, whatever. He's going all in, saying that the inflation will take care of the mortgage, which theoretically it sure the heck could, if it's going to be what I think it's going to be. Sure. So, and that just being another option, right? He was just trying to give options, because people said, I was listening to you guys earlier when we were talking about silver, and silver is kind of the donkey in the metals, because gold is the way to go. But I think that a lot of people don't have the resources for gold, but they still look at silver. Anyone, if you say, hey, look at this silver dollar, it's real silver, they go, oh, that's cool, because they still see silver as a value beyond just whatever it can use in electronics and stuff. We still, for the most part, look at it as a monetary value. So I think that silver will probably get its boost that it needs from that eventually, when people just decide we've got to have something besides dollar bills. And it's a lot cheap. I can buy 10 of these, or I can buy 100 of these for the same price I can buy one of those. Well, obviously, people don't. A lot of times people look at the, not so much the value of the single, but the value of the more.
Mm-hmm. Bigger pile.
Bigger pile. I like bigger piles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that falls under the opportunity category.
Right. Yeah. Have you guys looked at all, or maybe did you talk at all about a little bit more geopolitical? The Russia, China, they're kind of looking to each other, and what am I trying to think of? Oh, the India-America relationship that's kind of building right now. Have you seen any of that, Mike?
I haven't looked at it this week.
It's pretty interesting. The United States is kind of making a shift to normalize. Well, not normalize. We're already normalized, but kind of making a shift towards India for its regional partner right now to counter China and Russia. And it's a big to-do to China, because China and India obviously have border disputes all the time, and they're always rattling sabers and everything. But we all know China would basically wipe India off the map if there was a full-out war, easily. Resource-wise, there's a lot, resources are getting a lot tighter. India has 1 billion people. They need a lot of resources, just like their neighbor. And just like their neighbor, their people want to live a better lifestyle too than the crap lives they live right now. I mean, they can look at China and say, wow, they used to be crappy commies. Now at least they have homes and they have meals every day and stuff like that. So there's a hard military push right now to have a military alliance with India. One, to counter China and put more pressure on China, but also to counter China and Russia's alliance together. And their alliance is a lot further than just military, because they're looking at, energy agreements that China needs. China's stockpiling gold as well as Russia is, and they both want to see the end of the dollar. There's no doubt about that. At least the dollar being I think China's past the point where they need the American dollar. They probably can see in the future. It might be better for them to make a move now than to wait for the dollar to collapse. Probably better to be the one that helps make it collapse because you got something else set up. But anyways, between the four countries, you're talking about close to 3 billion people, 2.5, 3 billion people that are getting ready to, I think more than just, politics, but they're getting ready. The alliances are being formed in the new century. I'll just say that. Even though it ends next year, the alliances are being formed now, which is kind of interesting because India's never really been on our scope. They're just kind of, yeah, them. Now they are. And there's got to be a reason for that.
Yeah, Mexico is becoming a big deal trading partner again too. Like everybody, I mean, and not just because of U.S. government policy. A lot of companies are looking to diversify out of China for a whole set of reasons. The singular restriction from January, February, March of coronavirus in China was one of them. But there's all sorts of political risk and intellectual property theft risk and stuff like that with China too. And there are some phenomenal companies in China and some people who do very, very good work over there. I have some really great suppliers in China for my company that I like a lot. But people are looking to diversify out of that in Mexico. And Mexico is part of that as well as India.
Yep. Well, then if you look at Russia and China's side,
that's an opportunity as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, Russia and China.
Oh, I was just saying, they're looking at. We have our India and Mexico, and they've opened. I think it's pretty significant the door that they've kind of opened with Venezuela, even though it's been Iran that's sent the fuel there. I think obviously Russia's got to be behind it. China's got to have something to play with it. I don't see Iran being alone in forming an alliance with Venezuela. Russia's always had sort of a military agreement with them, haven't they, Mike? Something like they've always been friendly, at least.
They've been friendly.
You don't grab your anti-aircraft guns when you see a Russian jet land in your airport.
Right.
They're friends. But so you can see them, and we've talked about this for several years. You can see China making a move into probably even more now into South America because they're going to have a place. They've got to have resources. They don't have natural resources. The rest of the world does. Yeah. And Venezuela has what? Doesn't Venezuela have like the most oil in the world? Something. They're crazy amounts of oil there.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see. And all this is because America is basically the hegemony America has is getting the armor's being chinked out, little pieces, and then you can see all these other countries feeling their way through the world, kind of like, what can we get away with now? The emperor has no clothes. What can we do? So it'll be interesting to see not just what happens here in America. We don't got to worry about everything, but for interest's sake, it'll be interesting to see what the rest of the world does, expands out.
One of the interesting opportunities with Latin America, regardless of whether China goes there or not. Well, I'll tell a short story. When I was in Ecuador, they had a couple big projects they were working on. This is 6 years ago now. So hoping to go there again soon and get an update. But they were trying to put in a subway system in Quito, and I think they'd been trying for like 10 years, and they'd gotten like the sites for where the station would be, and they started drilling downwards, but they hadn't gotten to the point where they were actually making the tunnels. And the rock was way, way harder than they thought. And so the whole project was either going to be totally unfeasible or cost way more than they wanted it to cost. And I believe that their initial assessments were done by a Chinese company, and that's what they'd based the project on. They had another project there, which was a dam, and not in the classic sense. It wasn't like river, big wall, water passing through the wall, spinning turbines. It was more of like a pipe. It was like the Eklutna Dam outside of Anchorage, where you have this big reservoir, and you drill a hole down, you drill a hole across, and then it comes out, miles and miles away with a huge vertical drop, and then your turbines are spun by that vertical drop. Anyway, that project was done by a Chinese company. I guess they did the original assessment. The Ecuadorian government wanted some hydroelectric, and Chinese company did the initial assessment and then did the drilling. And the problem they had was in connecting, like some of those drills you have to connect underground. So you got to survey them in really well so your tunnels connect. Well, they missed. Their tunnels didn't connect. And then they ran out of money. Like they spent all the money that had been allocated for it. And so the project was just like stalled. And the Chinese company said, well, we need more money to finish the project. And the Ecuadorian government said, we already paid you to finish the project. But there was no way. You had this international business thing. There was no way to enforce the contract really across international borders. And so, which is sort of the classic, if you hear about the bad Chinese business relationship, that's sort of the classic story. And that happens between Latin American governments and Chinese companies more often than you'd think. So there's an opportunity there, maybe as individuals or as companies of Westerners, Americans in particular, who have sort of a renowned work ethic, regardless of whether or not it's earned, to go down there and clean up. And we talked. Corey and I had a phone call with Grant from Ocean Builders. If you guys know about that project, we talked to Grant at Anarchapulco. If you go to our YouTube channel and you look for the Anarchapulco interviews, there's Grant Romont from Ocean Builders. They're making these sea pods in Panama on the north shore of the country. We talked to him yesterday, and he was telling us what's going on with that project and how the coronavirus has affected it. But one of the things I asked him about was, what are the general opportunities for Westerners in some place like Panama? And he said, well, Panamanians, they really like money, and they don't really like to work very much. And he was trying to be super generous, but basically the work ethic is sort of rival level. So he's saying there's a big opportunity in general for Americans in particular in Panama, and I'd seen this in Ecuador as well, to go down there and find projects that people actually want to get done. When somebody wants to get something done, they know they're going to have to hire a American Westerner to do it. If they want it done on time and on budget, anywhere close to it, they know they're going to have. That's a still getting hiccups in the stream here.
There? I think Dave froze out.
No, I can hear your audio.
You got me there, Mike?
But not,
Oh, there we go.
Your face is frozen.
We could hear you, David. You back?
Nope, he cut out.
Nope. He not back. He out. Well, fun times. Fun time. Yeah, it's gonna be hard to. I don't know. I don't know what's gonna happen.
No.
There he is.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah, lovely Wi-Fi connection. Anyway, lots of opportunities. So even as America loses its hegemony, as you were saying, Josh, the work ethic of Americans is known. Like there's some other resources that we can take as individuals, like as individual ambassadors and go and make the most of a bunch of these opportunities.
Maybe this
Yeah,
is like the second European movement. From the first one, just for my example at least, the first one being the European move from Europe to Americas. Maybe this is the American movement from the Americas to wherever else. The new escape.
Could be. It could be. It could be. And there's good parts of the culture. A lot of it's still intact. There's good parts of the American culture that people like elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And at the very least, if people want to get work done, they know that culturally they need this structure to do it. But yeah, it could be. And it remains to be seen what happens in America itself. Like it'd be if it breaks apart or if states become more independent, it could be great. Like if the West Coast doesn't let California take all the other states down with it, well, Washington and Oregon are already a write-off. But if the other ones don't, it could
All
be
the
very
neighboring
interesting.
states.
Yeah.
All the
That's right.
neighboring states are really conservative. Even Western Oregon's really conservative. Northern Idaho is really conservative. Or Eastern Oregon, I'm sorry. Eastern Washington's really conservative. Then, of course, they're bumped right up against Nevada, Utah, Montana, New Mexico, all those states. And you're talking about the hardcore conservative regions. Be interesting. It's almost too bad that the commie states weren't all on one side or the other. They're kind of spread out throughout the United States. We can't herd them all into one area. It'd be a lot harder now.
The Roman
They'll
Empire.
need stuff to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the Roman Empire, its big collapse was that its waterfall event was only about 8 years, and there was a longer trend, but the big collapse occurred over about 8 years, and that didn't mean that the former Roman citizens just ceased to exist. They still went out and did other stuff. They created their own communities, right? And that became what became feudal Europe later on. Armstrong, Martin Armstrong, his Socrates system, which monitors markets around the world and makes projections based on that. The conclusion is basically that Western society is done with after 2032. And does that mean that we're done with, or does it mean that there's new opportunities to come about? And so, where does Alaska fit into that? It doesn't really make a lot of sense that Alaska would have to be stuck with the old continental U.S. And Alaska's 2 miles from Russia at its closest points, right? Little Diomede, Big Diomede. So why don't we prepare ourselves to be able to venture into business with our closest neighbor? If we already have that good reputation as reliable people, why does that have to disappear simply because the federal government disappeared, or because the states broke apart? It doesn't. In fact, the opportunity is that we become more resilient coming out of it. So, yeah, there you go.
Survivability without imports. I mean, that's the number one reason I would say.
Yeah, that and so much we talked about that on the show. So much of that is simply because of the Jones Act.
Well, there won't be a Jones Act if there's no Fed government.
Yeah, a lot of it is.
It makes it economically unfeasible.
If there's no Fed government, then half the population of the state leaves, and then you have an area larger than Germany with 300,000 people smattered across it. Really, I think there's opportunities there, but I think they're in stuff like finding vehicle-sized copper nuggets. That was what drew people to Alaska.
Yeah.
It's like there have been so many attempts to build technology incubators in Alaska, and they've all failed because there's no market for the products, and there's no critical mass of people pursuing intellectual capital. Not because Alaskans are dumb, but because you need a big pool of specialized skills to do that. But like resource extraction, you could say that resource extraction is a gold if you wanted to make a really bad joke. Resource extraction is how Alaska came to be, and for a big area with a small population, I think there's a lot of opportunities like that. But the more abstract opportunities that depend on specialization and hyper division of labor, those are hanging on by a thread here already. So it depends on the opportunity. Depends on the opportunity.
Yeah, we don't have a labor force as it is.
I know oil extraction would be way better up here.
Be hauling pipe like it's going out of style, I bet. There could be at the election. Well, could be. I assume that during this next presidential election, there'll probably be several months. I mean, could you see the next president taking office January 23rd, or is it going to be May 23rd because they're fighting in court the whole time? I mean, there could be basically not a government for several months. Really, there's gonna be a fight. It's not gonna end at the ballot box. It's gonna be legal battles all the way through. It could last months and months and months. Because neither side's gonna want to give in this time. No way. There's too much hanging on the balance. Too much.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting time.
I think
it'll be a lot of
Biden wins, basically.
Yeah, so between that result and his inauguration, there's going to be some opportunities. There's going to be a very small window of some very big opportunities.
Yeah.
Because if he wins and gets sworn in, it's going to be game on in January for some very big changes. It's like that's about a 2-month window to position for that.
Well, and the reason I think that too is because I don't think the left will accept Trump again. Period. They just won't accept him to be president. And conservatives always capitulate. Conservatives always compromise. It's in their genes, it's in their DNA to compromise. And that's how we got freedom in the first place in America, because we compromised our way into it. And they still have that mentality, and they always capitulate. They always give up. Oh, well, I guess for America, for the rule of law, we'll just let Biden be the president. And the left's going to be like, hell no, we're not having no Trump. Screw you. No matter what, we'll burn the place to the ground. Now, if the conservatives would say, we'll burn the place to the ground if Biden gets elected, then it'll get interesting. I just don't know if they'll do it. Don't know if they'll do it. I tend to think that they won't.
No, they'll just talk about how it's time to hunker down and buy their guns.
Romans 13, good stuff like that, Obey. Obey the new deranged lunatic that has dementia, the beginnings of Alzheimer's. Yeah, that's going to be... He's going to make Trump look like a freaking stable genius. It's unbelievable. And then finally, I'll be able to tell my children, I'll say, kids, I've been wrong all this time. You too. Anyone can be president of the United States of America.
Yeah.
Even Uncle Joe. I saw a really good meme the other day about Uncle Joe too, or Sleepy Joe. They were asking, how is it that Joe Biden never got the coronavirus when we all know it's a fact that he sniffs and smells everyone around him? And he doesn't wear a mask. There's something wrong with that science.
Interesting evidence.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I am going to sign out, guys.
Yeah.
Okay. Me too.
Cool. Yeah, lots of things that we're all looking into right now, and I'm sure we'll all have some good updates next week on the opportunities we've found and how we're gonna dig into them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thanks for watching, folks.
Later.
Yep. Catch you guys next week.
Yep. Bye.